Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. This is your host, Janelle Wood. And we're back today, and I'm so grateful. We have a returning guest that I just adore. He's become a real friend of this ministry. And before I introduce him, I am joined today by my co-host, Sarah. Sarah, welcome back.
Hey, good to be here.
Sarah, I'm so grateful that you're here to record on a Saturday as we're recording this. Today's guest is J. Warner Wallace. He's been on this podcast a few times, speaking about the truth of who God is and his own journey from atheism or skepticism to faith. And we'll have a whole bio down below about his story, and maybe let him share a little bit here. I know, Sarah, you had mentioned right before we hit record, before Jim joined us, that you had tried to do some research at the library. Tell us more about that, and then we'll introduce Jim.
Yeah, so I feel bad that I tried to get your book from the library when I heard you were going to be on the podcast, and it is on hold from other people. So you're very popular apparently, and I haven't gotten the chance to read it yet. So I'll just need to get your story from you yourself.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I guess that's good. I mean, what I'm encouraged about is that anyone is using a library. Hey, you know what? That's a win, right? Because I mean, I think we've gotten to the point where we're wondering. I just saw there was a big, just on a rabbit trail here. I just saw there was a big brouhaha about people whose books have been included in AI databases. Because the whole idea here is that we are going to, at some point, whatever you're writing online, that's just out there in the, it's in the internet, so any AI device can grab it. But when you write a book, I mean, the idea here is basically you need to get the book in order to have, otherwise you just give away all, intellectual property rights. And so now I've discovered that a lot of these books we've written are already in the AI atmosphere. So that'll probably be the truth going forward. So anyone who's going to a library, I think, is still pretty noble. So thanks for doing that. Trying at least.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Well, what it might mean though is that Sarah just like, I'm not going to spend any money on this knucklehead stuff. If I'm going to read him, it's going to be for free, or I'm not reading him at all.
She could ask AI. Yeah. Sarah, before Jim introduces himself formally to you, would you mind just sharing a little bit about who you are? Because AI probably doesn't know too much.
Oh no. Yeah, I try to keep a private profile, so hopefully there's not that much out about me. So I grew up in the church. I identify as a Christian now. Have kind of gone through like leaving the faith and then coming back as a young adult. And I now, for the past 5 or so years of being a Christian, have just struggled with a lot of doubt. I think I have a skeptical personality, and that plays a lot into it, and have just struggled to find my place in faith and in the church when I don't feel certain about my beliefs. And so I'm doing things like this, trying to figure out how I can believe something that is hard to believe and orient my life around something that I still feel unsure of.
Yeah, good. Excellent. I hope that this has been a place too for you. And I'm sure it has, where you feel like, hey, I can ask these questions. I think it actually, the harder thing is when you're at a place where you don't feel like you can ask any questions because they're not permitted. Yeah. And I think that and that's sometimes just fear, like in some families. The reason why they don't let their kids ask these kinds of deep questions is because they're afraid they don't know the answer. Maybe they're afraid that's not true. Maybe they're afraid I don't want to find out along with my kids that this isn't true. So I think that when we are a place where, likely today you're going to ask some questions that require a better answer than I'm going to give you, because that's just the nature of these questions. They're big questions. And if your big questions can somehow be answered in 3 minutes on a podcast, it's probably not a great answer. Right. Because these are big questions and they deserve big answers. So, but at least, you're at a place where, we all want to be able to have the answers to those questions. So we're not afraid of the questions, because then if you are, you never get an answer at all. So I think, and I think the research demonstrates this, that when people are in a place where they feel like they can at least ask the question, they're patient. They'll give it a go. But if they're in a place where they feel like they are not even allowed to ask the question, that's usually a recipe for disaster.
hmm Yeah, I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad too. I mean, this is all of us. This is whatever matters to you most, your object of devotion. That's probably the thing that you're gonna like. You want to be able to ask questions about it. So if it
hmm
wasn't this, if it was something else, if it was like a pastime or a profession that you were really devoted to, but you're struggling in it, well, then you're going to want to ask questions to get past the struggles because that thing really matters to you. So the fact
hmm
that you're trying to do that here, it shows me that it really matters to you. So let's do it.
Wonderful. Well, Jim, would you mind sharing a little bit of your journey from skepticism to faith?
Well, for me, I was not really, I mean, I was skeptical because I was such a committed philosophical naturalist. I just didn't see any purpose in any of this. I didn't really know anyone who was a Christian. I didn't have examples of what this would look like growing up. I wasn't raised around any Christians, didn't have any friends growing up who were believers, never had a reason to go to it. Like, I didn't know there was a youth group in churches. Like, that's how that worked. Had no, I didn't care, don't know, don't care. I knew that there were times when you did something in a church. You got married, and many people got married in churches. I had been to weddings in churches, um, and I was not a believer. I remember going to a Catholic mass wedding when I was probably only about maybe 6 or 7 years away from looking at scripture for the first time. So it was still, I was in my late 20s, and I remember thinking at the time, this is a lot of work just to get married. My wife and I got married by a justice of the peace. We didn't become believers until about 17 years into our relationship. So I just didn't have any background in it. Susie, though, we had young kids and we had put our kids in preschools, and where we were living, the two preschools we had used for them, one was Catholic, one was a Baptist preschool. So when they finally got to be school age, I think Susie's thinking was, okay, well, now we're just going to shift over to a secular school. And I was absolutely fine with that because I didn't go to a religious preschool in myself, and I had no upbringing in faith issues. So I'm like, it worked for me. I think it can work for our kids. But Susie did have questions about it, not so much that she demanded we go to church. So we were living in this neighborhood, in this house, for I'd say about 3 years before she convinced me to go to church. And so in that time, she wasn't going to church either. And if I would have asked her, what is the gospel? She would not have been able to answer it. We didn't have a Bible in the house. So we went to a big church because I had a friend who was attending this church. And it struck us as unchurchy to the point where Susie was like, I'm not even sure I want to stay here because this does not feel like what I would think of a church. It was like a big warehouse church. And but that's where the first day I was there, the pastor was provocative and said that Jesus was smart, and that's what prompted me to buy a Bible. And then I was reading through the Gospels to see what was so smart about Jesus. And that was something I had been interested in the past, is ancient wisdom. I was interested in ancient wisdom. So I had a sociology teacher in high school, and he was a Baha'i, and he introduced me to the writings of Baha'u'llah, the prophet of that system. And they were very, some of them were great. I mean, were some things that, like if you were to adopt this principle, you'd probably have a better life. So that was kind of what I was thinking I was going to find in the New Testament. But the Gospels are actually a record of what someone is alleging actually occurred in history. Very different than the writings of Baha'u'llah, which are like Proverbs. You can't test Proverbs. I mean, you might say, oh, that seems interesting, but how would you test it? You could say, well, my experience tells me that's probably true. Okay, but maybe somebody else's experience is different. It's making no claim. Proverbs make no claim that is testable. But an account that says this happened in the first century in this region of the world under this leadership, all right, that's different. That would be something that I could at least test and see if it's accurate. And so that's what I started to do. What I loved about when I first read through the Gospels, I saw they did not perfectly align. And that gave me hope because no witnesses, no 5 or 6 witnesses describing any event will ever agree on every detail. That just never happens. And all my casework tells me that if you got witnesses who agree entirely, they're probably lying. So the disagreements between the Gospels is what provoked me to test them. And I have a certain template that I use to test eyewitnesses. When I got done, I was like, oh, I'm kind of stuck with this. There's times when I wish it wasn't even true. Because it's hard in a culture where if you want to get along, you could probably, if you abandon some of these ideas, you'd probably get along a lot better than we're going to get along if we adopt these ideas and hold firm to them. But the problem is, if Jesus is who he said he was, then everything is downstream of him. And I'm stuck with all the stuff that Jesus teaches, whether I like it or not. And, I was raised in an entirely different environment and had an entirely different set of values. Pro-choice, working in the arts in Santa Monica, the kind of people I was working with were engaged in lifestyles that are not approved on the pages of Scripture. I think there's a lot of things that I had to kind of readjust my thinking on. And I had to do that because everything is downstream of Jesus, if Jesus is who he said he was. And so here, but that's kind of where I got where I ended up. But for me, it was all about, can I make a case for this? Unsurprisingly, I do a lot of work now in marriage resiliency with police officers, and they've been critically injured. That's how they get into the program, and they're sideways, and their marriages are terrible because they're suffering because of their either terrible injuries they've suffered that have changed the way they see themselves. And these folks are like me. They're just investigators, and so they need to know, is this true? I don't want it. Not does it work? Not is my experience better? No, they want to know, is it true? Is the data there? And that's kind of who I was. So that's basically it.
How long were you a detective when you came to Christ?
I was on the job about 8 years, maybe a little more, but I had been working investigations in one form or another for about 6. So I came on, usually when you're a cop, you spend a lot more time in patrol. But I came on a little bit later. I was 27, and I had a pretty, I already had a master's degree in architecture, and I was just, they moved me quickly, and I ended up in undercover positions, either working street dope or career criminals. And then I worked gangs for 2 years. I worked SWAT for 3 years, and ended up as an investigator. I was probably 6 years working cases before I got interested. I went out and bought a Bible, about 6 years.
Oh. What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I just appreciate your unique perspective a lot. I was thinking this morning about what I would want to ask you, and thinking about your perspective of dealing with criminals in the way that you would have to make a case that is going to change somebody's life. Like especially with cold case stuff where a person has been living free and unconvicted for an amount of years, and then you are the one bringing up evidence that is going to convict them and change their life. That's kind of a parallel to how I see believing in the gospel, hopefully in a positive sense when you believe the gospel instead of going to jail for the rest of your life, but in the sense of how can you build a case that you feel confident enough for to make a choice that is so pivotal to your life, and it really changes everything. That's what I've been
Sarah,
about.
I think that part of what might be helpful for both of us because there's no way you're going to get to, I don't care if you're a believer 3 months or 3 years or 3 decades. There's always going to be open questions. And I think part of what has helped me is that I've always understood the rules for jurors. So we have these big cases. These are death penalty cases sometimes, or they're life in jail without the possibility of parole. So that means they're never coming out. So there's a lot hinging on this. And clearly, these people have been out of custody for sometimes 30 years. They've got away with it. Now, they're guilty, but they did get away with it. So is it going to change their life? Well, yeah, it's also going to change the life of a victim's family who's been waiting for justice for 30 years. But how do we get a jury to make a decision that this is true? Now, here's what is tricky. I've never had a case without significant unanswered questions. Every case has significant unanswered questions. It's just the nature of the cases we work. So when we pick a jury, we ask the jury up front, are you the kind of person who can, because we have a voir dire process where we interview each juror before we impanel them. Both sides get to play into that, the defense and the prosecution. We can kick a number of these out. We don't have to have the ones that just sign up. We're going to go through a bunch to get the 12 in the box and maybe 4 alternates, 6 alternates, depending on the length of the trial. So we ask good questions. We ask them, hey, are you the kind of person who has to have every question answered? Because if you are, we're not going to impanel you, because there's no way I can answer every question. I've never had a case in which I can answer every question. Most of the time, I have no idea precisely how he did it or why he did it, because he hasn't confessed to us. I can make an argument for this, but I'd be foolish to try to convince a jury of something I don't really know, because I think that if one of those jurors says, well, I think he's wrong about X, so therefore I'm not going to side with him on anything else. So I don't even try to answer questions I can't answer. And I tell the jury that the standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt. That standard is too high. There's nothing you know beyond a possible doubt. You think you're having this interview with me right now? How do you know? Isn't it possible this is all an illusion? Isn't it possible there are people who think this entire experience in the universe we're having right now is nothing more than a computer simulation for all of us? Is that possible? I suppose. But the standard is not beyond a possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a lower standard. Why? Because there's a gap there. And you know what's in that gap? All of your unanswered questions. You know, it turns out that most of the time we operate without having full answers on everything else. If you're driving a hybrid car right now or an electric car, I have no idea. Like, I've got a 1970 Volkswagen camper. I lift the hood on that. I know how that engine works. I know how to, you know, when I was a kid, I took it apart, put it back together again. That's easy compared to these electric engines. I have no idea how they work, yet we get in those cars all the time and just drive them. And we have tons of unanswered questions. That's the way life is. So I just knew that was the standard. It was a little bit lower than most people think. Hey, I've got to, if I can't answer every question, I can't. Well, okay, as an atheist, I couldn't tell you how the universe began. And don't tell me there's an atheist out there who's got certainty about that, because that's why there are so many ideas about how the universe began, because there's no certainty. Why it appears to be fine-tuned for life, how life emerges from non-life. Oh, that's a question I'd love to see somebody try to answer. And then why that life, when it does emerge, appears to be designed for like it's been designed by a designer, because that's an uncontroversial. Even Richard Dawkins, the atheist, says, yeah, it looks like it's designed, but it's not. And then how it is we have consciousness and free agency in a deterministic, physicalistic universe. As an atheist, how do you account for those things? How do you account for objective moral truths, like the idea that it's never okay to torture babies for fun, if there is not an objective moral truth giver? If it's all just a matter of consensus or personal opinion, then everything is right and nothing is wrong. It's just a matter of who you ask. Yet we know that can't be true. That's not true. And how do we ground things and call them truly evil if there isn't a standard of righteousness that we're comparing the act to? Because if it's just a matter of opinion, well, I think this is evil and my culture thinks it's evil. Well, we can remove all evil. Just change your opinion. But that's not going to work, because we know there are objective evils that cannot be removed that way. Yeah, for those big questions, like 7, 8, 9 questions about the nature of the universe, I was more than content as an atheist to continue without any answers for those. So everyone's doing this. Everyone is living in their world under a worldview for which they have significant unanswered questions. So I knew that, and I knew that we asked jurors to move beyond that. And I usually say it this way: I've got a chain of evidence leading to this suspect is pointing right to him. It's not a foot to the left, a foot to the right, but the chain stops short, because in that gap between the end of the evidence chain and the suspect are all of your unanswered questions. Now, we've got more than enough evidence to point to him, but there are some gaps. We're going to ask you to step across the gaps and render a verdict. Do the same thing in terms of faith. We've got more than enough evidence for this, but there's gaps. There's an end of the evidence trail, but we step across that. It's not a blind step, because all the evidence points to this conclusion. It's just like every step, every verdict you make about anything, you're going to step across the unanswered questions. I think that sense of how we look at and process evidence was helpful for me, because it took the burden off, because I don't hold that burden about anything. Why would I hold it against Christianity?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit, I think, of the persuasion that faith is hard to have. Not like a lot of people, a lot of Christians would say that it's easier to have faith in God than anything else. And from my perspective, I don't really see that. So I think that's why maybe I expect a higher standard of proof, and where I find the gap very difficult to cross. So I'm trying to gather as much of the evidence to make myself feel as comfortable as I can, in maintaining the position of Christianity. But I don't come from it in the place that just because it's sort of pointing there that it's like easy for me to make that choice.
Well, okay, so let me just
Was
throw something out, and then I want to talk about some of these big questions you probably have. So just remember that there's no like neutral position. Everyone holds a worldview. The default positions are also worldviews. To argue that the universe has no God, is not governed by a divine being, means that it has to be governed by space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. That's all that's left. So it's not as though we can say, well, I've got some doubts about this worldview called Christianity, so I'll default to, okay, you're not going to be able to default out of a worldview. You're just defaulting into a naturalistic worldview. And then the question becomes, well, are you prepared then to start answering the questions that you're going to have? Why would that be more comfortable? In other words, every worldview has to stand on its explanatory power. So if we, I get it. I mean, we want to be able to answer the significant. I think there are sometimes like deal breaking questions that if you don't feel comfortable with that, it's like then maybe it is easier to answer those 8 questions I talked about over there. Right. But remember, every worldview not only answers certain questions, it offers certain consequences. So, for example, if secularism or atheism is true, then what is the point of any of this? I mean, can we have real purpose in life? Why would we care if something hurts a culture? Oh, we shouldn't do this because it hurts the. Okay, do you know how many cultures have risen and fallen, and if none of it matters, who cares about whether do you think that matters now? All the cultures that tried to do this, they've already tried and failed. So who cares if what is driving us to even behave a certain way? If nothing really matters in the end, do you know who your great grandparents were? No, you don't. And guess what? Your great grandchildren won't know a lick about you. None of this matters. There is no significance. Your great grandparents didn't change the world, and you're not going to change it either. And if this is all just physics, then none of this really matters. I mean, why is Jeffrey Dahmer's life so much? Why would we have anything bad to say about it? He was enjoying the life he had in the moment, and there is nothing bigger than the moment. There is nothing matters in terms of impacting culture. Well, he changed the lives of people. So what? You know, people have lived and died. It has no impact if there's no eternity. If Christianity isn't true and secularism is true, it doesn't really, as long as Jeffrey's happy, why are you complaining? You can't say your life is better than Jeffrey's. I mean, life is just about enjoying as much as you can in the moment because there's nothing beyond the moment. And there's no impact really beyond the moment. Because again, you don't remember your own family members just going back a couple of generations. And they won't remember us either. So this is why I say, even to say, look, I get it. I want some certainty, a certain level of certainty. But remember, it's not just that the worldview answers certain questions. It makes certain offers by necessity, or it robs those offers from you altogether. And that's why I think picking the right one matters. Now, I suspect, Sarah, tell me if I'm wrong, that a lot of this is about, hey, but I have significant questions, significant doubts. And those can be stumbling. So let's just try to at least bite that apple a little bit from a couple of sides and tell me what it is that you think right now is like, yeah, this is my problem and I need to address it.
Real quick, if I can just interject one thing. I know, Sarah, you've expressed to me and previously that you've kind of embraced this mysterious form of like, yes, there's probably truth out there, but I could never fully know it. So is that where you're at? And I just wanted you to be able to share that with Jim before you launch into whatever questions you have.
Yeah, I think I want to think that we can know truth, but I'm not convinced that we can. I think that we can make good, educated guesses, but that we can actually know something, I don't think we know it until death. And so I want to make the best guess that I can, but even at that point, to me, it doesn't feel like an assured thing. And I guess it's part of, on one hand, I do want God and Christianity to be true, and to be real, but just because I want it to be true doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to let my bias affect how I see the evidence.
Right. Are you saying that? So I understand the skepticism about whether truth can be known.
Hmm.
Is that what you're saying? Basically, you don't think the truth can be known?
I don't think that it can be objectively known.
So
I
do
think
you
that
know
people
this?
have experiences,
Mhm. Do you
where
know?
they would.
Okay, so when you say that, I don't think truth can be objectively known, you realize you're making an objective truth statement, right? So you're saying, I know
I
objectively that truth can't be known objectively.
Yeah, I guess I would clarify it in the realm of religion.
Okay.
I'm not like going into science
Okay,
and those
so we
things.
already know, for example, that there's just as much skepticism in science today as there is in any other field of study. We just came out of 2021, right? We just came out of COVID. And whatever we thought, I remember the day where I took the first vaccination as a police chaplain, because my agency, if I wanted to serve in my agency, everyone had to get vaccinated. So we were amongst the first responders that got vaccinated with the very first trial dose. And the promises that were made to us, none of those ended up being true. So I think that all of us, I mean, so what was proposed as objectively true,
Hmm.
clearly it wasn't. And I get it. That doesn't bother me, because I think that, but the idea that there's nothing could be true about religion, this is the one field. Isn't that interesting? So the one field that actually doesn't just propose a claim, make a claim, but makes a claim that then kind of calls us to a certain form of living.
Hmm.
That's the claim all of us want to say, yeah, there might be truths in other areas, but this one that calls me to live a certain way, no, that can't be. It might just be that there's the link, that most of us will resist claims that call us to live a certain way. Scientific claims don't call us
Hmm.
to live a certain way, but ethical claims that are formed in religious beliefs often do. And then we're,
Right.
we're kind of stuck with this. Now, the question also becomes, well, I think that I wrote a book called God's Crime Scene, because I think the science and philosophy demonstrates the existence of God. All the same science that's out there that people might look at for skeptical reasons. If you look at the same data, remember, science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Science is just a collection of data, but then that data has to be interpreted. And I think I look at that data for the beginning of the universe, for the fine tuning of the universe. And I think there's a growing body of scientists that are starting to infer that the God hypothesis might be coming back. Based
Hmm.
on what? Based on the scientific data collection. And then what kind of inferences we make from the data collection. But let's just go back for a second. So the question becomes then, can we know with enough certainty? I think that's, if I'm hearing you right, it's that I'm not sure I could know with enough certainty to be comfortable.
Hmm.
Yet I wonder how much you've examined every other claim that you hold to be true, and you realize that you haven't tested any of those claims, yet you act as though they're entirely certain. For example, do you understand how the lock on your door works? Yet you stick the key in every day. Do you understand how your car ignition works and why? By the way, cars blow up on driveways a couple times a year. Is it within the range of
Great.
possibility? Yeah.
Thanks for
Didn't
that.
need it.
Oh, worse than that. You're far more likely to die for one cause. Get in your car and drive it on a road today. The data's out there. You think
Hmm.
you're worried about getting shot? Please, you're going to die on the road. The data's out there, yet you do it every day. It turns out if you
Right.
needed the kind of certainty that we often say we need with religious claims, we'd be fearfully frozen in place without going out of our homes. because we literally do not require that level of certainty for anything else. Anything else. I hate the word faith in that sense. I wrote a book called Forensic Faith because I think that we ought to have a faith that's grounded in the evidence, because you'll never have enough evidence. Never. So you'll still take a step of trust given what you know evidentially. That's going to happen regardless of your worldview. I honestly can tell you that's not a claim that's unique to Christianity. That's a claim that every single, the only question is, what is the nature of the unanswered questions you're going to have to step across? That's it. But the idea of certainty, evidential certainty, applies to every claim, not just religious claims. You ought to be just as I'm just really skeptical about religious claims. I'm not sure there's any way to be evidentially certain enough. Just be fair and apply that to everything, because there's no reason to limit this to just religious claims. Then why would you limit it to religious claims? If you're saying, well, I've got an experience with the door lock, I've done it 1 billion times. Well, there's lots of people who have been Christians for 35 years and will tell you they have similar experiential certainty from their religious beliefs. I mean, now we're just in a game of like who's got more certainty. I think the reality is we need to apply the same approach. Here's what you do. You ask all the questions you can ask and you get all the data back you can get. Then you make a decision about whether the best inference from the data is X, Y, or Z. That's it. So my question is not so much, because I think that I want you to push beyond, well, I'm not sure, because that's a non-starter then. Because that means, okay, well, if Jim answered every one of my questions, I still would default back to, well, I just don't think I can have certainty. Okay, let me tell you what that really is. By the way, we would never impanel that on a jury. That's a cop-out. You know what that really is? I'll be honest. That's investigative laziness. Because it stops the investigation. It's like, yeah, I don't want to really do the hard work. I'm just comfortable in my kind of closeted agnosticism. You know, because that's a very comfortable position to take. It requires no commitment. So if Christianity is true, what you see in Revelation is a church that is neither hot nor cold. They're lukewarm. They've made no commitment one way or the other. I love what C.S. Lewis says. If this is not true, it's of no importance. And you and I should not even talk about it anymore. There's better things we could talk about. Today is a Saturday. You guys are doing this on a Saturday because of me. I had a conflict yesterday, so you guys moved everything to Saturday. I so appreciate it. And now we are doing this in the middle of college football Saturday. Okay?
Oh.
And if this isn't
Didn't
true,
realize.
yes, if this isn't true, what are we doing here? There's several significant games today that we should be watching, because if this isn't true, this is not worth our time. It's of no importance, according to C.S. Lewis. Here's what he did say. If it is true, though, it's of ultimate, infinite importance. It's the most important thing you'll ever learn. Here's the one thing it cannot be: moderately important. It's either not important at all or the most important thing you'll ever think about.
Right.
I want to check in, Sarah. Jim just said some hard things. I want to get how you receive.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. So let me just say, Sarah, let me just apologize in advance for a couple of things. No, here's what I mean. Because I get really, my wife just wants to choke me most of the time because we're doing this marriage resiliency together. And I'm like, I say a lot of hard things to guys and gals who are cops, because I think cops are in the business of saying hard things all the time. You call us, we've got 8 minutes to solve this problem and get to the next call. And so a lot of times we have to get there. Okay, stop that. You're being an idiot. Get over there. Go. We're gone. See you later. And then we leave. And that kind of harshness does not translate well into other areas of your life, right? So please forgive me. There's a kind of a cop transparency. Just okay. We got to cut to the chase. Let's get to the issue that's really out there. And I get it. I understand that the idea that you can't know enough about. Well, I think the only way you can know that is if you've examined everything there is to examine. And because we haven't done that, we don't know, we can't really answer it that way. Right. I mean, I think that there's enough. I think that there's enough. But then again, I spent, enough time truly drilling down. That's why I want to know, like, what are the things that you think? I got to this question, I realized I could never really know the answer to that well enough for me to move past it. Well, what was the question?
Okay, let me circle back real quick. Yeah. You don't have to apologize at all. This is what I came here for, and I appreciate being challenged. So yes, no worries on that. I think, like you said, which I very much agree, that um, what we believe about God is the most important thing, and I think that that's why I have such a high standard for proof on it. Like you're saying with the other examples of the lock on my door, the car
Yes.
in my driveway. I don't have my hope and trust in them,
Right. You don't feel
so I
they're not as
don't
consequential.
apply. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
that's where I find it reasonable to at least have a higher
Right. So let
standard
me offer
for
something to
God.
you, just so that we
Hmm.
can. This might be helpful, might not be. I do get that question a lot. Don't you need a certain kind of evidence? So the only criminal cases I can put this to, we don't even go to trial in California anymore for misdemeanors. We don't even arrest anybody for misdemeanors anymore. And property crimes are lower level crimes, sadly. So we don't even do a lot with lower level crimes. But the highest level crime, it will be murder. That is the one for which there is no statute of limitations. There is no case of more importance than what we're going to do in a murder trial. But the kind of evidence we're going to use to make the case is no different than the kind of evidence we would use to make a residential burglary case. Either we're going to have some fingerprints, maybe some eyewitness testimony. In other words, if you take out all of those pieces of evidence for the most important criminal issues in the history of criminals, they end up being quite ordinary. And the kinds of a case, we assemble them in quite ordinary ways to come to, even when we're examining. I had a case once, for example, where the woman was killed with a garrote. That's a wire strangulation device. And I mean, there's not a lot of examples of garrote murders nationally, let alone in the state of California. It was very unusual. And as the details kind of unwrapped, it was like, this was a unicorn. This was a unicorn case. And we made that case in front of a jury the way we make every case, in front of every jury, using very ordinary evidence. Now, what you might think, though, and I think you're right to think this, is that I would have to have a certain level of certainty, though. So in other words, when we're saying it needs extraordinary evidence, often what we're saying is that I would have to have a certain level, maybe an extraordinary level of certainty. Totally get it. I think that's fair. And that level is going to be different for each person. So what you consider to be extraordinary might be different than somebody else who might look at this and say, well, I've got enough. I knew. And by the way, we polled jurors after criminal trials and we asked them, like, at what point was each of you thought I was good? I was ready to go. Because our cases are always cumulative. So this is why I would like to encourage you. Yes, I think the case for God and the case for Christianity is cumulative. It's built not on one piece of evidence, but on literally hundreds of pieces of evidence that the best inference from those each individual piece is the existence of God and the truth of Christianity. I could never accept this. And what happens is, in these cumulative cases, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. You eventually get to a point where you're like, you know what? Yeah, any one of these things does not seem all that big. They're just a paper cut. But now I feel like, hey, there's a dog in that room with you there. I can see that. Yeah.
There is.
Yeah. But I still wonder, Sarah, so the reason why you're like, I'm not quite sure that I could ever be that convinced. There's got to be something, though, that feels like a wall that is standing between you and even taking a first step. Like, what are those kinds of questions? What are the wall questions that you feel like, yeah, here's why I can't make it. I can't take a step.
Right. Yeah, I think and I have taken steps, just to be clear, but it's like 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back. Yeah, I think what I wrestle with the most is the Bible, treating it as a reliable and authoritative source of information, and our interpretation of it. So the resurrection being one of the biggest, like the most important claim in Christianity. Um, like I was saying, I do want an extraordinary amount of evidence and confirmation of such an extraordinary claim. And I am like almost every day the thought goes through my mind that I just need to go to school and like actually learn in a professional sense, like actually devote time to figuring all of this out, because I just do what I can reading and podcasts and
Yeah,
things.
for sure. No, I think you're right. That is the most important evidential question. It was for me. If the resurrection is true,
Mm.
now the question becomes, I'm not a big Shroud of Turin guy, and I'm probably take a lot of abuse for even saying that out loud, but that's just not, I think it's got some potential. I'm not convinced by it. But here's what I know. Every explanation has strengths and weaknesses. Every explanation, including the true one. So when I go in front of a jury, I know that I think I have the guy. I'll give you an example of this. I had a guy who killed his wife, and he denied it all the way through the trial. And nobody believed us. I thought the case was strong enough to go to trial, and we did. But nobody believed us. The victim's family, his dead wife's parents, did not believe us. They loved this guy. This was the son-in-law. This is the son they never had. They refused to believe that he was the killer of their daughter. So they weren't even convinced. We got a conviction. We got a jury to find him guilty. I did the Dateline episode, and Keith Morrison did not believe he was guilty. We just went through this whole. It was like ridiculous. Nobody believed us. I thought we had more than enough evidence to demonstrate that he was our guy. And in the end, I knew there were weaknesses in the case. Every case has got weaknesses. I thought the case was strong enough, but it had weaknesses. I understand why people didn't believe us. When we convicted him at the actual sentencing hearing, he decided to confess to it and give us the location of the body. So in the end, we know we had the right guy, okay? But all through that process, nobody believed us. Why? Because every case has weaknesses, and that case had a ton of weaknesses. But it was the truth, but it had lots of unanswered questions. Okay. So when I was at the resurrection, here's what I did. I simply took every possible explanation for the empty tomb, every possible explanation, and I asked, what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? And I think there are like 6 or 7 or 8 explanations for why there might be an empty tomb, why there might be a claim that somebody saw a risen Christ, and it could still be untrue. I think there are 6 or 7 atheist explanations. The problem is they all have deal-breaking problems. They don't work, and that's why there are 6 potential explanations. In other words, if you're atheist number 4, you don't believe that atheist explanation 1, 2, 3, 5, or 6 is good. That's why you hold to number 4. But the guy who's holding number 1 thinks that 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are lame. The guy who holds to 6 thinks that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are lame. The reason why you think the other ones are lame is because they truly are. Now, the Christian explanation is also lame in the sense that it has a weakness. For me, it had a weakness. Here was the weakness. The weakness was it requires a supernatural resurrection. I mean, duh. There's the weakness. I mean, yes, does it answer all of the data that we have from the first century, the transformed lives of the apostles? All that stuff is answered by the truth of the resurrection, but it requires something that I rejected: supernatural activity. So I knew I needed to ask myself a bigger foundational question first. Do I have good reason to believe that I should reject all things extra-natural? If I can't explain it with space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, is it possible anything could exist or could have any causal power if it's not space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry? Those are the forces that are involved in naturalism. Now, here's why that was important to me. It turns out that if naturalists are honest with themselves, they don't have an answer in those categories. For example, for the beginning of the universe, they think that something outside of space, time, and matter began the universe. That's called Big Bang cosmology. That is the standard theory amongst secular atheists, cosmologists, and astrophysicists. Even though there, of course, are multiverse theories guys and string theory guys, most atheists believe that theory, which is based on the science. There's like 6 lines of evidence that point to that reality. Here's the problem. It requires a causal force of incredible power that sits outside of space, time, and matter. So they continually try to redefine, well, what is space? What is time? What is matter? Because they don't want to admit there's something extra natural at work in the universe. But if there is, Sarah, then we have to at least open our hand to the possibility that extranatural things might also occur inside the universe. Just have to be open-handed about it. That's all. So whatever seems like a weakness because it feels like it violates my philosophical naturalism. Well, as a philosophical naturalist, I already embraced the biggest move toward supernaturalism. That something outside of space, time, and matter began the universe. Right? Because the science demonstrates that the universe, space, time, and matter did not begin. It didn't exist before the beginning of the universe. So what's causing it? There's the huge dilemma. There's a lot of people who that alone is why they believe that God exists, at least. This does not demonstrate that Christianity is true. That's going to be on the basis of the New Testament. But the reason why I was rejecting the resurrection as a potential solution or an answer for all of the evidence that's out there is because I rejected the supernatural. At least be fair about that. We can't reject things outside of space, time, and matter when the people who do this work are stuck with that as well. So that kind of at least made me open-handed. So here's what I would say is that if you examine all the potential explanations for the evidence of the first century claims related to the resurrection, you're going to get like 6-7 lines of evidence. The one that has the least number of deal killers in it is still the Christian one. So I'm stuck somewhere. And I think the best evidence that they know that it's the best explanation is because there are so many attempts at alternatives and none of them work.
Do you have any thoughts about why God would give us, in a sense, limited evidence around the resurrection?
Yes, I do have a sense of it. I'll tell you, it's a weird sense, and you can do with what you want. It's, you've heard Jesus say that we are fishers of men. Interestingly, the first people he calls are fishermen, and he tells them that they're going to be fishers of men. And if you've ever read through the Gospels and noticed this, but the first time Jesus preaches anything publicly, it is a parable, the parable of the sower. And right away when he preaches it publicly, like, why use parables? Just say it. I mean, at some point in the Gospel of John, he's on the front of the temple, and the Jews are like, okay, enough already. It's late in the Gospel of John. Just tell us, are you the guy or not? Stop beating around the bush. And you know what he does? Parable. He just messes with them even more. Like, why is he doing that? As a matter of fact, when he tells the parable and the parable of the sower, right away, people are like, why? What? And he says, hey, if those who have ears to hear, his disciples say, why do you speak in parables? They want to know, by the way, what does that mean? And he tells them. He tells them privately. Why doesn't he tell people publicly? He's fishing. And you know what the bait on the hook is? A parable. Because it turns out he cast the parable out. And the people who want to know, what does that mean? I'm intrigued. They come to him and they say, hey, what does it mean? And they end up becoming his disciple. That group was getting larger and larger. It was the people who bit on the hook. Because what he's looking for are people who, he says it this way, have ears to hear. In other words, they're leaning in. Because those who seek him will find him. And by fishing with parables, he's weeding out all those who are seeking him from those who don't really care. And most people we're going to meet are people who are in that group that don't really care. You could even tell them all this and let me show you they don't care. They're not leaning in. They're not asking the question, is this true? By the way, it's only people who ask the question, is this true, that eventually end up stepping in. That's the first step of stepping in, is questioning, having ears to hear. And so what he's doing is he's looking for people who are seeking. And I think God does this all the time. Is that by the way, he's quite the gentleman. He is not going to overwhelm you, because to overwhelm you is to remove your autonomy. To overwhelm you so that, there's just no choice in it, actually eliminates love altogether. If you, let's say that if my goal was to get you and Janelle to love me, one strategy might be just to overwhelm you. In other words, I'll start sending you $1,000 a day. See if that'll do it.
Please.
Please, yeah, right. Or maybe I'll start sending, I don't know, whatever you value. I'll figure that out, and then I'll just overwhelm you with it so that you not do it. Does that mean you really love me, though? You're just overwhelmed. It turns out if I want you to love me, I have to let you do that freely. I cannot either program that into you, so I cannot remove free agency. The very thing that causes 99.9% of all the trouble in the world is free agency. But here's the problem. Without free agency, there is no love. If I want a world in which you can experience love, even to love me as God, I have to give you the dangerous thing that allows you to hate me. It's logically impossible for me to create a world in which you could love or embrace freely something that you're compelled to embrace. That's not love. That's me, that's false. It's a false expression. It might look like love, but it's not love. So I think there's a reason why God fishes with a certain level of uncertainty. Because right now, what you're doing, Sarah, is demonstrating to him that you actually do love him. Because if it didn't matter to you, why would you waste today on this? So to me, this is just a matter of clearing the shrubs, because the reality of it is I already know you're there. You already do love God. You're already seeking him. You're like one of those people who's saying, what does the parable mean? Please stop talking in parables. I just want to know. Well, that's the people he's seeking, because you're seeking him first. He says the door is open. Just knock. Just come on in. But people who don't knock don't want to come in. He's not interested in those people. So he's going to find out who those people are by fishing. And this is why I think it's so powerful that we are responding the way we are today.
How about one more question, Sarah? Because I know you want to respond to what he just said.
Sorry.
No, this is so good.
I have so many thoughts. One more unrelated question, or
whatever you want, because I saw that hitting you, and I would like for you to be able to respond.
Yes, I feel like I wish we could just like power around through all this, but it wouldn't be helpful. I mean, to be honest, you're more thoughtful than that. And that's why having a relationship with Janelle, it's about relationship. I always say there's two things, Sarah, we need to be discipled. We need information and relationship, because it turns out that most of the people who are in the church who we have a relationship with haven't really thought deeply about these things. We're all wired differently. You're wired way more like me than you're probably wired like them. So when you ask these questions, they maybe are like, I never thought about that. But you have great relationships with them, and they have no information. Now, the other problem you have is somebody who's got tons of information but can only give you an hour. They're not in this daily relationship with you where you're exposed to each other for hours. That's why discipleship takes both of those things, information and relationship. Anyway, go. You're right, Janelle. You should ask whatever you want to ask.
Well, okay, so I think the best use of my time then with you would probably be to hear about your progression towards faith and how you found, was it difficult for you initially? Did you struggle with doubt, and how did you move towards a place of confidence? Tips, advice.
So I wasn't raised with any Christians. My dad's still a very committed atheist. So I never struggled with doubt in the sense that I had certainty and then I had a moment of doubt. No, I just thought it was all false. I wasn't against it. I've got a friend named Lee Strobel who wrote a book called The Case for Faith, The Case for Christ. His wife, Leslie, got saved when he was still an unbeliever. And I think he was upset about it. He was upset about it. And so he really wanted to kind of show her, this isn't true. Why are you wasting your time on this? And his investigation actually led him into the faith. Okay, that wasn't me. Susie was neutral. I mean, we didn't care. I didn't care. It was not a big enough. I mean, why would you care about the tooth fairy? I mean, if someone wants to believe in it, great. If it helps you, great. My dad's this way. It's a useful delusion. If it helps you live a good life, knock yourself out. He's willing to come to church with you. He's willing to come to when I was pastoring, he would come to church with me. I pastored for a season there while I was working as a cop. And then I wrote a book, and then that changed everything. But he would come to church, and he would be happy to celebrate what we were doing. He thought, it's good for you. Good for you. Your kids are turning out great. You got a good life. Good for you. But it doesn't need to be true. That was me. So I just got to a place where that cumulative case, there were so many straws in the camel's back that I thought, okay, I'm kind of stuck here. I'm in a place where I need to make a decision. Now, I will tell you that you can have belief that something is true, yet not be committed to it. And that was me. I was not committed. I knew that the evidence for Jesus was strong, but I needed to stop reading the Bible, 8 months in. I needed to stop reading the Bible to see what it said about Jesus. I needed to start reading the Bible to see what it said about me, because I never would have embraced the hard truth. And I should have. I mean, I work cold cases. These are people who have lived for 30 years as though they didn't do a murder 30 years ago. But they did. They look just like us. They act just like us, but they killed somebody 30 years ago. That we are fallen people, and we can disguise it really easily. And I was one of those people. And so I just needed to see, is the Bible describing me truly as a sinner in need of a savior? Because I thought pretty highly of myself. And once I started reading it to see, and I would never have trusted it to describe me accurately if it wasn't describing Jesus accurately. Like, you got to get that right first. And once I determined that that was true, well, then I started reading it and trusting it for what it said about me. And then I knew I was the sinner who was in need of the Savior, but I knew the Savior already existed now. So I could put those two together. So was it hard for me? Really? Again, because I know that the most important decisions you will ever make, you will not have complete information. Someday you're going to meet someone who you will marry, whether you're a Christian then or not. And you know how many people I know who get married and only later on find out that their husband had been cheating on them for 30 years. They had a certain level of certainty, right? We operate all the time in the most important areas of life, given the best we can to understand as much as we can and make decisions accordingly. If we're fair, we'll do the same thing here. On the other hand, if we don't do that, well, then you're right. You won't. But then please, if we're going to, I always tell people, if theism is, forget about Christianity. If theism is not true, just remember that under atheism, you've got to be fair and jettison all the other things like transcendent purpose, transcendent meaning. You can make up your own purpose and your own meaning, but don't think for a second it really matters, because it doesn't. Nothing really matters in this life under that system. Just be honest about it, at least. And Dawkins is brilliantly obvious about it, the atheist. The universe is just absolutely pitiless, doesn't care about your suffering. There is no good, there is no bad. There's just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, which don't care about you. So at least be honest. To live that way means, so here's what I see happening. You see people all the time who reject theism, but live as though it's true. Mm-hmm. And Dawkins does this. This is why he says he's a cultural Christian. No, he's not a cultural Christian. What he means is, I'd much rather live in a country that is governed by a Christian worldview than one that isn't. Okay, well, you can't steal from the Christian worldview if it's not true. That's even crazier. Now you're really living a lie if you're borrowing from a worldview you reject. So that's the problem, is that I think it leaves us in a place where if theism isn't true, we have to recognize that it gets pretty bleak really quick. And then you have to start kind of creating things that aren't true in order to pacify your lack of purpose and meaning and value. And those things are tied to your identity. And if your identity isn't something that's temporary, then all purpose is temporary, meaning is temporary, values are temporary. If your identity is tied to something eternal, then you can ask questions about, is there an eternal transcendent purpose to life? Is there transcendent meaning? Those things are grounded in identity. And you're either going to put your identity in something you find in your own heart, which is temporary, or you find in the culture around you, which is temporary, or you establish in God, which is eternal. So those are your three choices in terms of identity formation. So how are we going to do this? And then live accordingly. That's a big deal. So do I think that's why you should be a theist though? No. Now, that's just the beautiful consequence of theism. Now, you could call it an evidence in a sense, because, yeah, if Christianity is true, it should help you flourish. And it does. Most of the values that we embrace as secularists related to patience and humility and the things that we show, the data shows help you to flourish as a human, those are all ancient biblical principles. So I think in the sense that, yeah, so it's not, is it an evidence? In a sense it is, because if Christianity is true, it ought to describe you the way you really are. And I think it does. So I think that's why we got to be careful what we jettison. It's because I think we kind of think, well, if I just let go of this worldview, there's some neutral ground I can stand in. There really isn't. You're going to be in some worldview. It's either going to be a theistic worldview or an atheistic worldview. It's very polar. There's no third option. So which of these two is it going to be? So anyway, the point is, for me, I just knew that at some point I had enough evidence to make a step. I'm in a position right now where if you said to me, Jim, is it possible that Christianity isn't true? Oh, absolutely, it's possible. It's not true. I always say that about anything. If you ask me any question on the stand or in an investigation, is it possible he's innocent? Absolutely. Not reasonable, but anything is possible. Everything is possible. We don't live in possible. You'd be crazy to live in possible. We live in reasonable. Everyone lives in reasonable. Everyone. Think about it. We all do. To live in possible means, well, it's possible I could choke on this iced tea. It's possible I could electrocute myself plugging in this phone. It's possible. No. We don't live on what's possible. We live on what's reasonable. So I think that reality for me was I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is, I think this is beyond this is reasonable. But is it possible I'm wrong? Sure. Of course. And by the way, I'm super comfortable with that difference. That does not shake me a bit that something might be possible, because I just know that we have a jury instruction for that. Don't be silly. The standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt for anything. It just isn't. So that once you get comfortable with that, now you're okay. Now I can exhale, and I can actually live in my unanswered questions without feeling like it's paralyzing doubt. You know.
Can I ask one thing about that?
Yeah.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. How does that position interact with your idea of a personal God? Like somebody who wants to guide you and have influence in your life.
Right. Well, I think that first of all, I'm pretty how can I say, I'm pretty detached about the way I assess whether or not this being that creates the universe, there's something out there, a force outside of space, time, and matter that is powerful enough to create everything we see in the universe. Now, the only question left is that force personal or impersonal? That's it. Because I think the atheist would say, well, no, there could be a force outside of space, time, and matter. But if there is, it's an impersonal force, kind of like some law of physics. But of course, you can't have laws of physics without space, time, and matter. But the point is, it's something akin to this that is impersonal. But the problem is that all the evidence would show that of the two possibilities, personal or impersonal, personal is a better choice. Here's why. Okay, let's get really weird and abstract for a second. Okay, so the universe begins to exist. The truth of it is that anytime you have a force that enters into an environment, you feel its effects the minute it enters into the environment. So, for example, if I have a room, no gravity, and I insert gravity, the force, the minute the gravity is inserted, everything falls to the gravitational spot, right? Because the minute you insert the force, you feel its presence. The problem is if there's a force that begins the universe, that force then can only be as old as the universe, because the minute it enters, you feel its force, the beginning of the universe. That's why I know of the two choices. Impersonal forces cannot say, wait, not now, not now, not now. They can't make a decision to wait, do it now. Personal forces can. So that means you could have an uncaused first cause that could cause the universe, but it would have to be personal, not impersonal. And that makes sense, because if there are objective moral truths, like it's not okay to torture babies for fun. Okay, all moral obligations are between persons. So for example, I have my clicker here. I can take this clicker and hit it in the head, and there's no moral content to that. But I can't do that to you, because moral obligations are not between objects, they're between persons. So if there is an objective moral obligation out there, it means there has to be an objective moral obligation maker. In other words, physics could never give you morals. The study of physics can tell you what is, but it can never tell you what ought to be. That requires a mind and personhood. So I think there's many good reasons to believe. Forget about whether you read it in scripture or not, just philosophical reasons to believe. And this is why you see design features in biology, why you see information in DNA. You can't get information from physics. You can't get information from space-time physics, chemistry. You can't get it, but you can get information from intelligent beings who know how to write in a way that you can then decode. There are coders that allow you to decode. That's what's in DNA. Of the two options of an impersonal force or a personal force to account for DNA, I think a personal force is by far the better explanation. So there's several now lines of evidence that point to, of the two possibilities, impersonal force or personal force seems to be a better explanation for the evidence. So I think I'm going to have to account for some type of personal deity. This still does not mean Christianity is true. But it does eliminate a lot of kind of atheistic thinking where it's an impersonal force that's involved. Then eventually it's going to come back to the manuscript evidence for the resurrection if Christianity is true. So for me, I had no problem with the idea that there's a personal force. The question is, why would a personal force allow us to suffer? Well, remember, our worldview, we are not in the garden. The garden is how it ought to be. We're also not in paradise. The paradise is how it will be. We are stuck in the messy middle between the two gardens. But our worldview describes two gardens. Atheism is just the messy middle. So both of these worldviews have to try to help us understand what's going on. Where's the hope in the atheist worldview where there's no gardens? There is not a perfect design from which we fell, and there's not a perfect design to which we return. There's none of that. It's just a messy middle. So I think of these two worldviews, and by the way, it's not like, oh, well, Christianity proposes things should be a certain way, and they're not. They're messy. No, Christianity has always been about two gardens separated by a bunch of craziness, chaos. So this is what we should expect if Christianity is true. A messy middle and gardens on either side. And I think that's what our hope is. But again, that explains, for a lot, that has some explanatory power. Look, if life is just your 90-year line segment, you're born, you die 90 years later, well, then there's all kinds of evil because things happen in our 90 years that are unexplainable. You can't explain them. But if the geometry is different, if it's not a line segment, but a ray that starts at birth and it continues through death infinitely into the future, well, in a million years on the other side of the second dot, you're not going to be thinking much about what happened between the two dots. 90 years compared to a million is a millisecond. So the question then becomes, well, how do I assess what life is about? Stop assessing it as a line segment, because that's not what our worldview demonstrates. Our worldview says it's a ray. Yeah, the problem of evil is a problem for people who believe life is a line segment. As an atheist, the problem of evil is a real problem. But if Christianity is true, we have to stop living as though we're living in a line segment. Part of the problem is we say that we believe that there's a ray, but we live as though it's a line segment. And then we complain and shake our fist at God because the line segment, we don't like it. But that was never the promise. That was never the description from God. That's not the Christian explanation of life. That's the atheist explanation of life. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to live as though the Christian view, at least if we're going to say we are Christians, let's live as though Christianity is true. That would change everything. And it would certainly change the way we would say, well, why is God so hidden? Yeah, in the millisecond, you mean? Why does God allow pain? Oh, you mean in the millisecond? All these things are really stuck in our living as though atheism is true. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think we have to kind of broaden out. Remember that the Christian worldview, we just have never really thought about it, and we have not lived as though it's true. You're in the messy middle between two gardens, but relax. It's a ray. It's not a line segment. It's going to be okay.
Wow. Well, we always close with one final question. Jim, it's very familiar to you, but before we wrap up with that, and I'm sure we'll have a short answer to that because I know it's college football Saturday.
No, I don't mean to say that, but yeah. Hey, that's all. Everything's now being recorded. Okay, I can just watch it and skip past the commercials. It's even better.
Oh, bless you. No, this has been wonderful. Sarah, I'd love to hear your feedback for Jim before you wrap up here.
I feel like I can't even say anything without it being a bunch of more questions. I really appreciate your perspective and I appreciate your time. I have a lot of things to think about now and a lot of encouragement to dig deeper. So thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, I always feel this way, especially when we do. A good friend of ours, Frank Turek, does a lot of college campuses where he does a lot of Q&A. And I see the value in that, right? Because a lot of us have, but really, the Christian life is so conversational, right? It's not lived from a stage with 30 minutes for Q&A. Like the Christian life is this constant dialogue, because whatever it is that you love, that's the thing you're constantly thinking about and constantly talking about. It's also the thing you're prepared to defend. Whatever it is you can defend, and we all can defend something. You're the best college, they take a vote on what the rankings of college football teams are until they go to the finals, right? Okay, everyone's got an opinion. They can make a case for why their team is. Why waste your time making that kind of a case? Well, we got a fantasy football team. Why even be in a fantasy? Because these are the things we think are so dang important that we are actually willing to research and defend. But it turns out that if Christianity is important, then this is an ongoing, every minute dialogue. And that's why my prayer for you is that when you make a choice about who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, that person you spend the rest of your life with feels the exact same way that you like. This is the most important ongoing conversation you can have. And when you have it with another person who's chasing the same goal, it's the old isosceles triangle, right? The closer you come to your getting those answers you have about Jesus, the closer you come to each other. It's just the bottom leg of the isosceles triangle. It just gets closer and closer. And so you're at two different points. And then as you approach the apex, your 2 points become closer. So that chase, that living a life where both of you are as interested in, like you share the same object of worship. And by the way, this is even true for people who aren't Christians. There are people we know who are like in the same industry or whatever, and they at least have that commonality, that thing they chase. And the reason why I think that's not always effective is because at some point you will retire from that industry. But if Christianity is true and you're both chasing Jesus, you'll never retire from that. And this is where all of these questions eventually get asked and answered, because I feel like we could never we didn't do any service to any of your questions today. Probably all we did was create more questions. And that's because this is a life of constant discipleship. And almost always, when you see with Jesus, it's engaging the questions. But the problem, of course, is that you can't do it. And this is like, I hope that when you do get done, you think, I wish I had another 6 hours to talk about it. Because the fact that you think to yourself, I wish I had another 6 hours to talk about it, shows me what you love. And that gives me encouragement, right? Because if it wasn't important to you, you'd say, I'm glad this is over. I don't know. No matter if I don't have any more questions. We're good. Thank you. That's the kind of attitude of people who don't care. So when I see, I wish I just creates more questions. Yeah, you know why? Because this has value to you. So I hope you're getting in a place, either with Janelle or somebody else, where you can be in constant dialogue about your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
The Finding Something Real podcast, Jim, is about finding restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love in relationship with Jesus Christ. Which of those things, restoration, eternity, authenticity, or love, stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
But I think that for me at this point, as you get older, we were talking before we started here about I'm like the oldest guy. I could be one of your parent and the other grandparent. And so I think that as I have my own grandkids, I think that the idea of, am I doing enough to help them take steps? I tell old guys this all the time. Regret does not live in your job. It doesn't live at school, doesn't live in missed opportunities, certainly doesn't live on YouTube. Regret lives in your house. It lives in your house because you will never say, I wish I could have made one more video. I wish I could have answered that question better. I wish I could have. No, it'll be something involving your kids and your marriage. That's where you'll say, boy, I wish I could have done that thing better. So I think for me now, my goal is to go back and ask myself, am I discipling my kids and my grandkids? And I can't do that from an empty position. It's like, do I love the scripture enough to be in it every day? And I'm talking about it every day with my kids who are, 36 and 34 and 29 and 28, they're older. And I got grandkids now. So I think that's the focus. And I tell old guys this all the time. If you're not careful, you will miss your old age altogether because you will work right through it. And, I had a whole career as a detective, retired now, and I have the opportunity to disciple my kids through scripture. And that's the season I'm in. And I think that's going to be an important season. I'm J. Warner Wallace because I had a grandfather named Warner who meant everything to me. So I want to know if I can do that for my own kids. Because if I don't, that's where regret will live. So yeah, I think that's probably where I'm at right now.
It's good. It's a good reminder too. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jim.
Yep.
It's never enough. Sorry, J. Warner Wallace. We'll use your official name too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming back on here.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Great
questions. Great questions. Just never stop asking questions. We have to have a faith that not only has room for skepticism, but thrives, lives, breathes, flourishes with the kind of skeptic. By the way, in the Gospel of John right now with my kids, you don't think that Philip was a skeptic? What good could come out of Nazareth? Okay, that kind of skepticism. Nathaniel, why do you think you know me? That kind of skepticism is what leads to true discipleship. So don't shrink from it, but allow it to grow you. So
thank you.
Yep.
Until
Appreciate
next time.
your time.
Yeah, thank you.